The night was heavy, damp, and eerily silent. A cold wind whistled through the deserted streets of an abandoned industrial area, between rusted warehouses and scattered piles of garbage on the cracked asphalt. A frail figure struggled to move. It was a dog, a German shepherd, or at least what was left of one. Its once thick, shiny coat had turned into a filthy, matted mess, caked with dirt, dried blood, and open sores. The animal's body was crawling with an army of parasites. Engorged ticks clung to its thinning skin, while flies swarmed around its festering wounds. But the worst part was its eyes, lifeless, dull, as if something much deeper was wrong. Its breathing was ragged, labored, each breath a battle against the inevitable. The dog wobbled with every step until, unable to continue, it collapsed onto the grimy pavement. Life was slipping away, could feel it, but fate had other plans. Not far away, a team of emergency rescue firefighters was finishing up a routine call when one of them, Earl Whitaker, spotted something unusual in the distance. At first, it looked like nothing more than a pile of discarded rags. But then something moved. "Hold on, there's something over there." His teammates turned their heads, following Earl's gaze. And there, in the middle of the road, lay the dying dog. As they approached, a putrid smell hit them like a punch to the gut. The animal wasn't moving, but when Earl knelt down, he could feel the faintest rise and fall of its chest. It was still alive. "Dear God, how is this poor thing even breathing?" murmured Hank Collier, one of the other firefighters, his face filled with horror. But then, they noticed something else. Tiny dark specks moved across the dog's skin. Then, realization hit. It was completely infested, yet nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to discover next. Earl Whitaker's hands hovered above the dog's frail body, hesitant to touch it. The infestation was far worse than they had initially thought. The parasites weren't just on its fur. They were burrowed beneath its skin, writhing and twitching in grotesque motion. It was as if the poor creature's body had become a breeding ground for something far more sinister than mere illness. Hank Collier pulled back in horror. "Jesus Christ! What the hell is this?" Beside him, Walter Grady, the third firefighter, swallowed hard. He had seen burn victims, car crashes, and drowning rescues, but nothing compared to this. "We need to get him to a vet now," Earl said, his voice firm, though his stomach churned with unease. The German shepherd barely reacted. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, painful breaths. Its eyelids fluttered, trying, and failing to open completely. Whatever was inside of him was slowly killing him from the inside out. Earl quickly pulled off his jacket and gently wrapped it around the dog, careful not to press too hard against its mangled body. The others hesitated. "We don't even know what we're dealing with, if it's contagious." Walter started, but Earl cut him off. "Look at him, Walt. He won't last another hour if we stand here debating." That was all it took. Together, they lifted the dog into the back of the rescue truck. Hank grabbed a bottle of water and poured some near the dog's muzzle. But the animal didn't even attempt to drink. Something was very, very wrong. The ride to the vet. The engine roared as they sped down the empty streets toward the nearest emergency animal hospital. The silence in the truck was thick with tension. Earl drove with white-knuckled grip, his heart pounding. He had rescued animals before. Strays, wounded dogs, even a few cats stuck in pipes. But this was different. The infestation, the vacant look in the dog's eyes. It wasn't just sickness. Felt unnatural. Then, a sound broke the silence. A low, wet gurgle. Hank turned sharply, his breath hitching. The dog's body twitched violently in the back seat. Its legs stiffened, its ribs expanded unnaturally. And then, a horrifying retching noise erupted from its throat. Earl slammed the brakes just as a thick, black, slimy substance spewed from the dog's mouth onto the truck's floor. Walter recoiled. "Oh my God!" The smell hit them a second later. Rot, decay, disease. It was worse than anything they had ever encountered. The dog let out a faint whimper, barely clinging to life. Whatever was inside him, it was coming out. And that was just the beginning. The inside of the rescue truck reeked of death. The black, slimy substance that had poured from the dog's mouth oozed across the floor, thick and viscous. Almost alive, Earl Whitaker could feel his pulse hammering in his ears as he gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles white. "What the hell is that?" Walter Grady's voice was barely more than a whisper, his eyes locked on the bubbling mess. Hank Collier gagged, covering his nose with his arm. "It smells like something crawled out of a grave." Earl had no time to process. The dog twitched again, its body convulsing violently. Then, from beneath its fur, something moved. Walter's stomach lurched as he saw it. Tiny, wriggling things pushing against the dog's skin, as if trying to break free. "Drive, Earl. Drive." Earl didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching as they tore down the street. The animal hospital was just a few minutes away. Whatever was happening to this dog, they had to get him help. A living nightmare. The dog let out a sound, a mixture of a whimper and a gurgle, its body arching in pain. Earl caught a glimpse of the rearview mirror just in time to see the fur on its back splitting open. "Oh, God!" Hank's voice trembled. "They're coming out." And then, the truck was filled with movement. Small, black worm-like creatures began to pour from the open wounds on the dog's back, writhing and twisting as they fell onto the seats and the floor. They moved unnaturally fast, skittering like insects, their slimy bodies leaving behind streaks of the same black fluid that had spilled from the dog's mouth. Walter jumped back, swatting at one that had landed on his sleeve. "What the hell are these?" One of them twitched, then lunged toward Hank's arm, latching onto his skin with tiny, needle-like appendages. Hank screamed. Earl nearly lost control of the truck. A race against time. "Get it off me! Get it off me!" Hank thrashed, trying to rip the creature from his forearm. The thing had burrowed in deep, its slimy body pulsing. Walter grabbed a pocket knife from his belt and, without thinking, stabbed the thing, cutting it away from Hank's skin. A thick, black ooze seeped from the wound, but the parasite shrieked, a sound so unnatural that it sent shivers down their spines. It wasn't just a bug, it was something else. Hank clutched his bleeding arm, panting, his face pale. "Earl, get us there now." The dog was still convulsing in the back seat, barely holding on. More of the creatures crawled from its body, squirming and scattering. If they didn't move fast, this wouldn't just be about saving the dog, it would be about saving themselves. The rescue truck skidded to a stop in front of the emergency animal hospital, tires screeching against the asphalt. Earl Whitaker barely threw the truck into park before lunging for the door. Hank Collier was clutching his bleeding arm, his face drenched in sweat, while Walter Grady sat frozen in shock, staring at the black, writhing parasites still crawling across the truck's floor. Inside the back seat, the dying German Shepherd lay motionless, its body an open wound of pulsing, grotesque creatures. Earl flung open the back door, ignoring the putrid stench that billowed out. "We need help. Now!" He shouted toward the hospital entrance. A vet tech, Dr. Lydia Monroe, rushed outside, her expression shifting from confusion to absolute horror the moment she saw the dog. "Oh my God, what happened to him?" she gasped. Earl didn't have time to explain. "He's dying. There's something inside him. We need to move." Lydia hesitated for only a second before nodding. She signaled 2 more staff members, who arrived pushing a gurney, but the moment they touched the dog's body, his flesh seemed to shift beneath their hands, like something was moving under his skin. Walter swallowed hard. Jesus Christ, it's still inside him. The infestation grows. As they rushed the dog into the hospital, the fluorescent lights inside revealed just how bad things really were. The black slime wasn't just oozing from his mouth anymore. It had begun seeping from his eyes, his ears, his paws. The German Shepherd let out a weak, garbled whimper as his skin twitched unnaturally. Dr. Monroe's team was trying to remain calm, but the horror was undeniable. "I need gloves. For fluids. Get me a biopsy kit. Now." She barked orders at her assistants, struggling to keep the panic from her voice. Earl, Walter, and Hank stood frozen just inside the doorway. And then, the dog's chest convulsed violently. "Doctor, something's happening," a vet tech shouted. Suddenly, a mass of black, worm-like parasites erupted from the dog's open wounds, splattering across the operating table, the walls, the floor. The hospital room filled with screams. Hundreds of them, small, pulsing things, wriggling with unnatural speed, launching themselves toward any living being nearby. A parasite landed on one of the techs, burying itself into the skin of her neck within seconds. She let out a blood-curdling scream, her hands clawing at her own flesh as thick, black veins spread from the bite. Hank staggered backward, gripping his own wound in terror. "Earl, I think I'm infected. The infection spreads." Dr. Monroe grabbed a scalpel, slicing the parasite off the tech's neck before it burrowed deeper. Black liquid oozed from the wound, but the woman was still screaming, her body convulsing as if the infection had already taken hold. Walter grabbed Earl's shoulder. "We need to get out of here, now." But Earl wasn't looking at Walter. He was looking at the dog. The German Shepherd's breathing had stopped. His lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. And yet, his body was still moving. The flesh on his chest began to split open, revealing something far worse than parasites. It was spreading, and they were all trapped inside. The emergency room erupted into chaos as the parasites spread across the floor, walls, and ceiling. The dog's body convulsed one last time before its ribcage split open, releasing a pulsating black mass of writhing organisms. Earl Whitaker stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest as a thick, putrid stench filled the room. Dr. Lydia Monroe's assistant, who had been bitten minutes earlier, suddenly collapsed, her body twitching violently as black veins snaked beneath her skin. Hank Collier groaned in pain, gripping his own infected arm as dark tendrils spread from the wound. His breathing became labored, his pupils dilating until they swallowed the whites of his eyes. Walter Grady reached for him, but Hank suddenly lurched forward, his movements jerky and unnatural. A deep, guttural growl escaped his throat as his hands clawed at his own flesh, fighting something rising inside him. Then, without warning, he lunged at Earl, his strength suddenly inhuman. Walter reacted on instinct, slamming a metal tray into Hank's side, sending him crashing into a cabinet. Earl gasped, shaken, but there was no time to process what was happening. Dr. Monroe's assistant had just snapped upright, her head twisting unnaturally, her mouth stretched open in a silent scream, black ooze dripping from her lips. Before Monroe could react, the assistant grabbed her with terrifying force and threw her across the room. The doctor hit the wall hard, letting out a sharp cry of pain. Earl's mind screamed for him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Hank was already getting back up, his breathing ragged, his fingers twitching as his nails darkened into claw-like points. The woman Monroe had tried to save was no longer human. The infection wasn't just killing them, it was changing them. Walter grabbed Earl's arm and shouted, "Move!" snapping him out of his trance. The doctor groaned, struggling to her feet as the infected assistant lunged again. Walter grabbed Dr. Monroe and dragged her toward the back exit. But Earl hesitated, his eyes locked onto Hank. His friend was still in there, fighting whatever was taking over his body. But then, Hank lifted his head, his lips curling back over blackened teeth, his voice now a twisted growl. There was no time. Earl slammed the door shut just as Hank charged, his body hitting the metal with inhuman force. From the other side, inhuman screeches and gurgles echoed through the hospital. Dr. Monroe clutched her ribs, breathing heavily. "We have to go now." Walter didn't need to be told twice. The three of them sprinted through the dimly lit hallway, the overhead lights flickering wildly. The infection was spreading, and if they didn't escape fast, they wouldn't make it out at all. The hallway ahead was empty, but the flickering lights and the distant inhuman screeches told them that safety was an illusion. Earl Whitaker's breath was ragged as he sprinted alongside Walter Grady and Dr. Lydia Monroe, his mind racing for a way out. Behind them, the door rattled violently, as Hank Collier and the infected assistant slammed against it. Their distorted voices no longer human. Earl clenched his fists. He had locked that door, but it wouldn't hold forever. Walter skidded to a stop at an exit door at the end of the corridor, yanking the handle. It didn't budge. Locked. He cursed under his breath, glancing back as the metal door behind them dented outward. The infected weren't stopping. Dr. Monroe frantically scanned the hallway, then pointed toward a stairwell on the right. Upstairs now, she gasped. Earl hesitated. Upstairs meant a dead end, but they were out of options. They took the stairs 2 at a time, their boots slamming against the concrete as they climbed toward the second floor. The hospital was eerily silent, but the moment they burst through the stairwell door, a new horror awaited them. The black parasites had already begun spreading across the ceiling and walls, wriggling through the air vents, seeping through cracks in the floor. Walter took a shaky step forward, then stopped, his face draining of color. A nurse stood in the center of the hallway, motionless. Her back was turned to them, her uniform stained with the same black fluid that had poured from the dog's body. First she seemed alive, but then her head twisted at an unnatural angle, completely backward, to stare at them with pupil-less black eyes. Earl's heart stopped. The nurse lunged forward, moving too fast for a human, her jaw unhinging like a snake's. Walter fired his gun. 1, 2, 3 shots. But she barely staggered, as if the bullets had only slowed her down. Dr. Monroe grabbed Earl's arm, pulling him toward a patient room at the end of the hall. Walter backed up, still firing, until he dove through the door behind them. Earl slammed it shut and locked it just as the nurse collided with full force, her body contorting violently against the glass. "We're trapped," Walter muttered, his voice laced with dread. Earl scanned the room. No exits, no weapons, no escape. Outside, more shadows moved in the hallway, their grotesque silhouettes pressing against the glass, twitching, writhing, waiting. And then, from the stairwell below, they heard the unmistakable sound of the metal door breaking open. Hank and the others were coming. The patient room was small and suffocating, its dim fluorescent light flickering overhead. Earl Whitaker pressed his back against the door, his hands trembling as the twisted figures outside scratched and slammed against the glass. The infected nurse stood at the front, her jaw still unhinged, her blackened eyes locked onto them like a predator studying its prey. Walter Grady checked his ammo. 3 bullets left. Not enough. His hands were slick with sweat, and his breathing was uneven. "This is bad." He didn't need to say it. They all knew. Dr. Lydia Monroe clutched her side, her ribs likely bruised from being thrown earlier. She glanced at the vents in the ceiling, her mind racing for options. "If we stay here, we die." Then, from the stairwell, came a sound that made Earl's stomach drop. Metal creaking, then crashing open. Hank Collier was inside the building. Earl felt a lump in his throat as he imagined his friend, or what was left of him, climbing toward them. The pounding against the door grew more frantic, the glass beginning to crack under the pressure. They were running out of time. Dr. Monroe's gaze darted toward a cabinet across the room. "Help me move this." Walter and Earl didn't hesitate. They shoved it against the door just as the glass shattered, sending shards raining to the floor. A gray, skeletal hand reached inside, its nails jagged and blackened. Earl stepped back, his chest tight with panic. Then, from the hallway, came a new sound, a low, guttural growl. Earl's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. It was Hank. The infected figures outside suddenly froze, their grotesque faces snapping toward the stairwell. The growl grew louder, turning into a deep, inhuman snarl that reverberated through the walls. And then they scattered. The nurse and the others lurched away from the door, disappearing into the shadows, as if sensing something worse was coming. A chill crawled down Earl's spine. If those things were afraid, what the hell had Hank become? Walter turned to Earl, his voice low and shaken. "We need to move. Now." Dr. Monroe pointed to the ceiling vent, her expression tight with urgency. "That's our only way out." Earl climbed onto the hospital bed, gripping the vent cover. Behind them, the hallway fell silent. Too silent. Then, heavy footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Hank had arrived. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the hallway, vibrating through the walls. Earl Whitaker's breath caught in his throat as he clutched the ceiling vent's metal frame. Walter Grady and Dr. Lydia Monroe stood frozen, their eyes locked on the darkened doorway where the glass had shattered. The creatures that had been outside were gone, retreating like prey sensing a bigger predator. Then, heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. Earl had known Hank Collier for 15 years, long enough to recognize his walk, his breathing, his presence. But what stepped into view wasn't Hank. A towering, grotesque silhouette filled the hallway. Hank's body had stretched, his limbs unnaturally elongated, his skin pale and cracked like dried leather. The black veins that had begun creeping up his arm before had now completely overtaken him. Pulsing under his flesh, his eyes were gone, replaced by two hollow, bleeding sockets. His mouth hung slightly open, his teeth jagged and blackened. Earl felt sick. Walter aimed his gun, his hands shaking. Jesus Christ! Hank's head tilted sharply, as if hearing something they couldn't. Then he moved. Nowhere to hide. Hank charged. The three barely had time to react. Earl yanked open the ceiling vent, shoving Dr. Monroe up first. Go! Go! Walter fired his last bullets. Bang! 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 But the bullets barely slowed Hank down. The creatures slammed into the cabinet they had used to barricade the door, sending it flying across the room. Earl caught one last glimpse of Hank's face, his mouth now twisted into an unnatural grin before he lunged. Earl barely pulled himself into the vent as Hank's claws swiped at his legs. For a split second, Earl locked eyes with what used to be his best friend. There was nothing human left. The crawl through darkness. The three crawled through the narrow, suffocating air duct, the metal creaking beneath their weight. Below them, the hospital was eerily silent, except for the occasional inhuman gurgling from the creatures lurking in the halls. Dr. Monroe, leading the way, whispered over her shoulder, "There's a maintenance exit that leads to the roof." Walter cursed under his breath. "And then what? We jump." Earl didn't answer. His mind was still stuck on Hank, on the thing he had become. He had seen death before, but this wasn't death. This was something worse. Then, the vent ahead of them bent downward, groaning under a sudden weight. Something was above them. Dr. Monroe froze. Walter reached for his knife. A low scraping sound echoed through the metal tunnel. Then, a single drop of black slime dripped onto Monroe's arm. She looked up, and the vent above them burst open. The vent burst open, and something dropped from above, landing with a wet, sickening thud between them. Dr. Lydia Monroe gasped, scrambling backward as the creature twitched, its body a half-formed mass of melted flesh and writhing parasites. Its mouth hung open in a silent, gurgling scream, black ooze dripping from its jaw. Earl Whitaker reacted on instinct, grabbing Monroe's arm and pulling her away just as the creature lurched forward, its elongated fingers twitching, reaching blindly for anything it could grab. Walter Grady didn't hesitate. He drove his knife into its neck, twisting hard. The thing let out a choked shriek, its veins pulsing violently as thick, dark fluid poured from the wound. It shuddered once, twice, then collapsed onto the metal vent floor, its body twitching as the parasites within it squirmed and died alongside it. Below them, from the hospital corridors, a new sound sent chills through Earl's spine. Hundreds of voices whispering, clicking, calling. The infected knew exactly where they were. The creatures weren't mindless. They were communicating. Dr. Monroe pointed ahead, her voice shaking. "We have to go now." The vent groaned beneath their weight as they crawled forward, the metal slick with parasite ooze. Every movement felt agonizingly slow. Walter glanced over his shoulder, his grip tightening on his knife. Something was coming. Earl could hear it, too. A deep, guttural snarl that echoed through the duct, vibrating the metal beneath them. Whatever it was, it wasn't small. Then a sharp crack. Earl barely had time to react before the metal beneath him gave way with a deafening snap. He reached out, grabbing the jagged edge just in time, his legs dangling over the open hospital corridor below. Directly beneath him, Hank stood in the shadows, or at least what used to be Hank. His hollow eye sockets tilted upward, his lips pulling back into a gruesome, jagged grin. His body had stretched far beyond human proportions, his skin cracked like old leather, his arms too long, his fingers twitching as if they were independent from the rest of him. With an inhuman screech, Hank leaped, his claws reaching for Earl's legs. Walter and Monroe grabbed Earl's arms, yanking him up just as Hank's fingers scraped the metal, missing him by inches. Below, more infected emerged, crawling out of the shadows, their bodies twisting and snapping unnaturally as they gathered beneath the vent. Some had warped faces, others had elongated limbs, their heads moving in jerky, unnatural motions as if they weren't controlling their own bodies. Earl scrambled back inside, his heart hammering. They had seconds left. Walter spotted the nearest vent cover and kicked it out, sending it crashing onto the hospital rooftop below. A cold gust of air rushed inside, and for the first time Earl saw an escape. Without thinking, he jumped, hitting the rooftop hard. Monroe landed beside him, groaning in pain, and Walter followed, barely keeping his balance. For a moment they just breathed. They were out of the building. They had made it. Then, from the edge of the building, came a new sound, wet, slithering, growing louder. A shadow stretched across the rooftop, its limbs moving unnaturally, dragging itself up the side of the hospital with grotesque ease. Walter turned, his face draining of color as his voice came out hoarse and broken. "Oh my God!" The rooftop was eerily silent except for the wet, slithering sound of something dragging itself upward. Earl Whitaker's breath hitched as he took a slow step back, his eyes locked on the twisted thing crawling over the edge of the building. It had once been Hank Collier, but now it was something far worse. His body had stretched beyond human proportions, his limbs unnaturally elongated, his skin cracked and pulsing with writhing black veins that seemed to move on their own. His empty eye sockets leaked dark fluid, and when he opened his mouth, it revealed jagged, uneven teeth, too many to belong to anything human. Walter Grady lifted his gun with shaking hands, but deep down, he knew it was useless. Dr. Lydia Monroe took a step back, her body tense, her mind racing for a way out. And then Hank spoke. The voice that came from his gaping, torn throat was wrong. A broken, stretched-out version of what used to be his best friend, Earl. The way it dragged his name sent a deep, primal terror through his bones. Earl swallowed hard, his stomach twisting into knots. He had seen death before, but this wasn't death. This was something else. From the edges of the rooftop, more figures began to emerge. The infected had followed them. They crawled over the ledges, their bodies warped and twitching, their eyes completely black, void of anything human. Some had once been doctors, nurses, patients, but now they were nothing more than shells, twisted into something beyond recognition. The whispers grew louder, an unnatural chittering that filled the air, sending shivers down Earl's spine. They were surrounded. There was no way out. Hank's body lurched forward, his movements jerky and unnatural, the black veins pulsing violently as if something inside him was barely contained. Earl knew what was coming. He turned to Walter and Monroe, his voice urgent. "Jump!" Walter's eyes widened in shock. "What?" Earl didn't hesitate. "Go. Now." Before they could argue, he grabbed Walter and shoved him toward the edge, then turned to Monroe. "You two. Get out of here." She shook her head, but Earl's expression was unwavering. The moment Monroe and Walter hit the fire escape below, Hank lunged. Earl didn't run. Instead, he charged straight at him. As the two collided, the rooftop shook with the force, a deafening screech echoing through the night. Walter and Monroe didn't see what happened next because they were already falling. They hit the fire escape hard, metal groaning under their weight. Above them, the rooftop trembled, filled with inhuman shrieks. And then, suddenly silence. Walter's breath was ragged as he looked up. Earl was gone. Monroe wiped the blood from her forehead, her voice shaking. "We have to go." Without looking back, they ran into the night, knowing one thing for certain: this wasn't over.